Welcome to the first plenary of the conference. This session is titled, as you heard, Arab Spring to Fake News, Chances and Challenges of Social Media in Political Communication. Now, for this panel, we tasked ourselves with reclassifying the role of social media in political communication. No small task, I can assure you. We thought a lot about how social media was first picked up as an early digital tool in political campaigns, in diplomatic communication, and of course in journalism. But we thought this was all with the aim to maximise the potential of engaging with audiences. And then we thought, well, how has this developed into the sophisticated digital strategies and even transformed paradigms that we see today? So with these reflections on where we've come from to where we are now, this led us to asking, how can we turn around the transformative powers of media technology for good? As the information provided on your leaflet about this session notes, there were hopes back in 2010 for the role of social media and what that could play, the role it could play in supporting and even growing democracy worldwide. But I expect from some of our speakers today that we'll hear how the digital participatory era has been manipulated, whether people are aware of it or not, and to what extent. So we're going to ask, what's happening with the original role of social media? What are the hopes that we had? Are we connecting? And what have been the unintended consequences? What's actually happened in reality? Campaigns on misinformation crept up on us at first, but now, of course, everyone's heard of fake news. But do people truly have an awareness, a resilience, and a control over what they stumble upon in their news feeds? The answer, of course, should be yes, but is it? Knowing what we now know, can we take back control and create resilient, informed online communities? Do governments seek to inform their citizens, to empower them? The citizens, that is. Sadly, I can speak for Asia and say no, where even my university students doing research have been silenced by politicians on Twitter. We have a panel this morning with extraordinary insights for this plenary, from how governments and diplomats are using social media from Europe to the US and across Asia, to rich experience spanning the very start of high-impact digital political campaigns that are now complex digital engagement strategies, to the journalist practitioner who survived reporting on historic regimes only to experience the abuse of social ethics and morals like never before. Varied, yet complementary, and high-level, high-performance insights. So I'd like to call each of the panellists to the stage individually so that you can get to know them really well. First up, please welcome Matias Lukens from Switzerland. Now, Matias is the lead author and brainchild behind Diplomacy, which we'll hear a lot about over the coming 2 days. He leads the digital network of Börsenmakler across Europe, the Middle East and Africa, and was formerly at the World Economic Forum where he brought digital strategy to Davos, and has earlier also had an esteemed career, I believe, in journalism too. Next, please welcome Jan Melissen, Senior Research Fellow at the Netherlands Institute of International Relations, Klingendaal in The Hague. Jan is a professor of diplomacy at the University of Antwerp and has worked with several governments in Europe and beyond on change and innovation in diplomatic practice, including digital diplomacy, MFA networking, and public diplomacy. Then please welcome Vincent Harris, CEO of Harris Media. Now, Vincent worked as Chief Digital Strategist for Senator Rand Paul. Previously, he's worked on the digital side of 3 presidential races, having run all online operations for Texas Governor Rick Perry and Speaker Newt Gingrich's 2012 campaigns. He oversaw digital operations for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud successful campaign and spent over 3 years working with Ted Cruz. And last, but certainly not least, please welcome Maria Ressa, a tireless professional. Maria's been a journalist in the region for more than 25 years, most of those years as CNN's bureau chief in Manila, then Jakarta. She became CNN's lead investigative reporter, focusing on terrorism in Southeast Asia, documenting the growth of Jemaah Islamiyah and its links to Al-Qaeda. Maria headed ABS-CBN News and Current Affairs for 6 years and will tell us more today about her online startup, Rappler. So, where have we come from, where are we now, and what can we do to impact and better understand the future? We're going to hear now some opening remarks from each of the panellists on their own experiences regarding chances and challenges of social media in political communication. And I will say that just in some brief discussions with the panellists before today, I said to them, I said, I want to make sure that we'll be talking about chances and challenges, and there'll be a lot of negativity, but let's try to bring something positive from all of this. Either something that we can lead or something that we can get ahead of in the future. So without any further ado, I'm going to actually start with Maria Ressa, who's faced many challenges in carrying out her work, yet always impresses me with her heart for humanity and democracy. So Maria.
Hello. Yes, excellent. I'll grab this. So I think I've seen the best and the worst. Rappler is a startup that's 5.5 years old. So let me say that all of it, I think politics, media, anything in our society, it's drastically changed. It is not what we thought it was. And it starts with that Moore's law. You know, it starts with information. The amount of computing power you can put on a chip. It doubles every 18 months. And it's doubled so much now. Moore's law came out in the 60s, 70s. And now, if you look at it, and this is my first factoid, there's more than 6,000 square meters of information storage material generated per second. So per second, every one of us has to deal with 6,000 square meters of information storage material. What does that mean? It means this. So in a good thing, all of the Airbnb, Uber, tech companies, right? That's this exponential growth because it allows so much more information on that thing. A company like Rappler, we're no longer linear growth like media. We're 100 to 200% to 300% growth year on year. The tech companies are 300%. But now imagine, and this is what 2016 brought us to, exponential growth of propaganda, exponential growth of how we gather information. This is what 6,000 square meters of information storage material per second looks like. It's the ripple of a nuclear wave, right? So just so you visualize it and you see what we're going through, it's this. It's that ripple of the wave, 6,000 square meters. And that only lasted a few seconds. Now imagine that lasts decades. That's what we're living through. And we are now at, I think, one of these moments that actually, it's existential. Certainly for journalism. Here's where I go, and this is the amount of time people spend on the internet as of January 2017. You can see the United States is in the middle, China's there, Hong Kong is a little bit over here. Singapore, do I see you here? Where? Yes, middle, next to the US. And look at what number one is, the Philippines. So that's part of the reason we set up Rappler in the Philippines. Because I was in Singapore in 2011 writing a book when I thought, wow, it only costs $1 in a day to set up a company in Singapore. I should do it here. Well, the Philippines is my petri dish. And it was an amazing petri dish. This is what we did with Rappler. Core is journalism. We married it with technology. And then we opened up to the crowd. That's content creation, but distribution was social media, crowdsourcing. Social media allows you to crowdsource. Crowdsource gives you big data. We'll talk about this more tomorrow. This is the growth and the change model that works. In 5.5 years, we've been able to prove it. That tweet or post is only the tip of the iceberg. It carries an emotion. That emotion travels through social networks. Your social networks in the physical world are your family and friends. Your family and friends, imagine in social media, your social networks are your family and friends on steroids because you have no boundaries of time and space. So that's that exponential growth. When you put it on social networks, it changes behavior. And there's no better year, at least in the Philippines, to show us that than 2016, when a town mayor won using social media. The very first time somebody used social media effectively to win the presidency in the Philippines. The first time, the negative. So that's all the positive of growth, the positive of empowerment, the enabling environment, the positive of growth as a media company. 2014 was the first time we saw bots come around, and it was in corporate warfare. Hashtag smart free internet, and this is a map, a Twitter map, using this technology that we developed in Rappler. Smart is a telco. It was giving out free load, essentially. Every time someone tweeted hashtag smart free internet, a bot was programmed to come in and take it over and give a negative message. And this is what happened on Twitter. Look at the map, bots and fake accounts. The yellow dots are the millennials that were the targets of Smart, which is the account all the way to the left. And what it did were the bots and fake accounts essentially roped off the millennials. So if you're familiar with political movements, it's similar to a communist strategy. Ring the city from the countryside. It took us a weekend to break it apart, but still, that's Twitter. 2014. Okay, let me bring you. Now we go to today, and so I will hand it over also to my colleagues. Bots in terms of hashtag Pray for Marawi. May 23rd, Manchester bombing, state of martial law in Mindanao declared in Marawi, ISIS taking over the town, a big chunk of that. So hashtag Pray for Marawi trended. But using our tool, we were looking at, well, it doesn't quite seem right. This spike happened, and then it happened right around the time the government declared a state of martial law, shortly before. And when we went in, this is the tool that we use to map communities on Twitter. We looked at it, and I said, there aren't enough information cascades, right? Eigenvector centrality, the larger the circle, the larger the influence. And what you want is for something that trends organically, it should be much more connected. We should be much more connected. Over time, it looked like this. And that little connection on the right, on your right, is actually where the media groups were talking using the hashtag. But in general, it's disparate. So we dug and took a look at what started it trending. It was this tweet. And this tweet was retweeted 54,046 times in the first minute. 54,046 times. A bot can tweet a heck of a lot faster than that as well. So that's one. Here's another one. Last October, we did a whole series, this time looking at Facebook, because the Philippines is a Facebook country. We're roughly 110 million people, but 52% are on the internet. Of the 52%, so roughly 52 million Filipinos on the internet, 97% are on Facebook. Our public space is Facebook. And what we saw is, just looking at all of this stuff, we showed you that a sock puppet network, 26 fake accounts following each other, connected with campaign accounts during the May 2016 elections. These 26 fake accounts were actually able to reach more than 3 million others. Now, that's just the micro. The macro we did in these series, and I'll tell you more about them tomorrow, but this is what happened the weekend after we released the series. This is the reaction we got that weekend. So you gotta know, if you expose a propaganda machine, you're going to be targeted, right? So there were the easy ones, like Norly Bala is a fake account. Maria, you are a waste of sperm. Your mother should have swallowed you. Kind of creative, right? The normal messages of oligarch. But this one, Peter Ian Tabar, I saw it and I took it and posted it on my Facebook page and asked if anyone knew who he was. He's a doctor. He's based in Cagayan de Oro City and he's young. Die, stupid bitch. If you don't like our president, leave our country, whore. So this kind of, I pick it out for you only because he apologized once I put it out publicly and told me that it was because he left his account open in an internet cafe. And then I went into his account and showed him how he was attacking other female journalists. Female journalists bear the brunt. sexism and misogyny on the rise. So where does it go? It's not just us. It's actually, there are several studies that are out. If you're following this, you've looked at computational propaganda. This is Oxford University study of 9 countries, including some of the ones in our part of the world. There's a Jigsaw report that is coming out soon. It's called Patriotic Trolling, Online State-Sponsored Hate. I've worked very closely with Facebook. We're one of their alpha partners in the Philippines. So I actually got to speak to Mark Zuckerberg. He's super smart. But, you know, the conversation was off the record. I will tell you the opening part because I thought it was really funny. I told him 97% of Filipinos on the internet are on Facebook. And he kind of frowned just a little bit. And he said, Maria, where are the other 3%? This is where I am now. So about 2 months ago, we ran the transcript of President Duterte speaking with President Trump, and then the propaganda machine tried to trend #arrest Maria Ressa. So this was a statement. Then it spread towards the Twitter accounts of the campaign that's now been weaponized. Call her to the Senate, arrest Maria Ressa. Then it spread to a real person. I can smell an arrest and possible closure. And then it became sexual in nature, which is the best way to denigrate any kind of credibility of anyone, whether it's a reporter or a political opponent. Maybe Maria Ressa's dream is to become the ultimate porn star in the gangbang scene. Okay, I won't read it out loud for you. You can read it enough. And then finally, this one, whose school, once I posted it, the school immediately apologized, and he then contacted me. He's a student about to graduate from college. It's the breakdown of values. Make sure Maria Ressa gets publicly raped to death when martial law expands to Luzon. It would bring joy in my heart. I worry about the future. Here oh gosh, let's just go through this. At least, this is a general, the head of the armed forces, actually apologizing to me for what soldiers had said online. That's really rare, and I love General Año. But here are the challenges. And I'll leave it here, that we need protection for journalists like Sutichai, you know, people who just, like me, we just want to continue reporting. We're just journalists. We tell you and hold a mirror to what you're doing. Protection for journalists against online threats and intimidation. When does free speech turn into dangerous speech? How do we build trust and credibility without splintering into echo chambers? It's hard to be a politician in this day and age. Are you going to move to the dark side and co-opt online state-sponsored hate, or are you going to not be able to reach people? I can't wait to hear what Matias says. And then these are the things. We need to focus on the new battlefield in the virtual world because it is the tail that wags the dog.
Thank you very much, Maria. Well, from Maria's account, I'd actually like to hand over now to Vincent, because Vincent, you've had, well, Maria mentioned, the propaganda machine and the campaigns. Now, Vincent's had experience from that side of the world, but obviously not in the Philippines running those campaigns, of course, but Vincent's very experienced across Egypt, the US, and throughout Asia as well. So I'd like to hear your insights when you're running political campaigns and helping to develop, what are the chances, what are the challenges, and I guess what are the motivations? I'll hand it over to you.
Sure, thank you. I'm gonna stand up. First off, I appreciate the Konrad Adenauer Foundation for the invitation. I've spoken at a few conferences for them and find the Institute to be so helpful for spreading democracy and having conversations. So thank you for the invitation. Let's give a round of applause again just for the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. So, thank you. Yes, thank you. So first off, I take a very positive approach to the internet and social media. I spent 2 months working in Egypt after Mubarak stepped down. I was brought over on a grant from our State Department and spent 2 months working with the grassroots and newly formed political parties. So I've seen the benefits and the great opportunity that digital provides. So I don't know, I would guess that my PowerPoint's probably going to be the most positive, but I have a lot of hope for the future of politics and of democracy. So what are some opportunities that digital and social media have provided? Well, the ability for minority groups to organize. Look at groups like the Human Rights Campaign in the United States, which is the LGBT group in the United States. They have an ability now to organize and get their message out before, which didn't exist. Look at groups that are more niche, whether you agree or whether you don't agree, groups like the National Rifle Association in the United States. We have our Second Amendment in the United States, and now people can actually coordinate online and support their issues together. Persecuted groups. One of the groups that I worked with in Egypt largely was the Coptic Christian community, about 12% of the Egyptian population. It's a group that's very persecuted. They just got bombed a few months ago on Easter, I believe. Horrible tragedy. And this group of people in Egypt can coordinate now through Facebook and actually build a strong political alliance, whereas before their power was dissolved amongst the larger majoritarian populations. The April 6th movement, after Khalid Sayed was beaten brutally in one of the northern cities of Egypt, pictures of him flowed online. And it was those pictures that actually led to this rising of the April 6th movement, which was the young, largely under 25 years old group of folks who took to the streets in Tahrir Square. I will never forget, I actually wrote a paper for graduate school on interviews that I did in Egypt. And there was one gentleman who told me that his life was saved because he saw on Twitter where Mubarak's police were killing people. And his life was saved because he was supposed to go home that way, and he went home another way. So I understand sometimes our feelings can get hurt online when people say really mean things, and there are really bad, awful things that are said online. But to me, this is bigger than feelings. To me, this is bigger than personal attacks. To me, the internet spreads democracy. To me, the internet gives democracy. Sharing, okay, we already talked about that. Let me give you two other examples. I spent about a month in Cambodia, and I was working with different political parties there. Sam Rainsy, who you all might know, was exiled. He has a wonderful Facebook Live news program that his supporters are running in Cambodia to actually share their side of the news. And this is changing, but up until a couple years ago, authoritarian regimes were so far behind. These are really old, these are really old people that don't understand what's going on online. Most of them, right? And they let Sam Rainsy wisely, I think, at the time, share his message back into Cambodia. That's really cool. He was exiled, and he's still communicating to people in his country. Aung San Suu Kyi, I will tell you, I have never had a more nerdy experience than when I got to see the back end of Aung San Suu Kyi's Facebook page when I did some work in Burma. It was so cool to me. Her Facebook page, the overwhelming engagement of her Facebook page were people less than 25 years old. Wow, that's democracy. That's new democracy. If she didn't have all these supporters, if somebody wasn't constantly online using the internet like her supporters were, would she have been released? I'm not so certain. I'm not so certain because Western journalists kept talking about it. She's winning awards while she's under house arrest. Does any of that matter? No, power of the people matters. And the internet gives power to the people. It lets them organize. Direct contact with our elected officials. This is a senator from New Jersey who might be running for United States president. Cory Booker is his name. He's a textbook case of being a great elected official on social media. These are just from a few days ago, average people, a lot of them in Jersey, that he's responding to. Do we remember how it was before the internet, y'all? Let's actually think about how it was. Our elected officials lived in faraway capitals that people couldn't get to, average people. They would never talk to them. And average elected officials didn't really give a crap about what they had to say because they know they never have to face them. Well, now online we can shame our elected officials. Online, from a positive end, we can talk to them. We can give them feedback. And some of them listen, like Cory Booker. That's amazing. That's the power of the internet. Money in politics. I worked for U.S. Senator, well, at that time, Texas Solicitor General Ted Cruz in 2012. People said you could never win in Texas if you weren't rich. Well, we raised $3 million through the internet from small dollar donations, and that's how Ted Cruz funded his campaign. Did you know that Donald Trump raised more money online than Barack Obama? I bet you didn't, because the liberal media sometimes doesn't share that with you. Okay? But that's a true statement. Donald Trump raised more money from small dollar donors than Barack Obama. He raised more money than Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders combined. I bet you didn't know that. So the internet is rebalancing the money equation. This is not some back-end corporate interests with super PACs and let's take a negative view. Let's take a positive view. The internet allows people like Bernie Sanders to run against the machine. That's power. That's power from the internet. Give me a break about fake news. If there's one thing I'm going to hear through this conference that you're not going to hear from me, I am for freedom of speech. I am for the Constitution. I am for people saying whatever they want to say. Because you know what true authoritarianism is? Taking that away. Do you know what scares me the most of anything we're talking about? Not fake news, Facebook telling me what's fake news. Facebook telling me what information I need to hear, like I'm an idiot. This is a very famous book, The Responsible Electorate, where V.O. Key wrote, voters are not fools. And how dare we judge? How dare we judge what is something a voter should hear and not? How dare we judge what's news and what's not? Do you remember the National Enquirer? Normally when I walk by it, it's just this really tabloidy newspaper that's in all of our grocery stores. Most of the time we walk by, it'll be talking about aliens having sex with each other, right? And how aliens landed in the White House. But do you know what they did one day? They ran a story on John Edwards. John Edwards, who was the front runner for president. And they were right about John Edwards. They broke it. I promise you, if the National Enquirer broke that story on Facebook, it would be called fake news. And it was true. How dare we sit and tell voters what is fake and what is real? That's what scares me. That's authoritarianism. And that's what we as journalists, as citizens of democracy, as people that love free speech, hopefully, we should be more in favor of free speech than we're worried about hurting people's feelings. There are challenges. I don't live under a rock, okay? So there are challenges. Let me talk about some of them. Selective exposure. As a conservative, do I watch conservative stuff? Hell yeah, you better believe it, okay? What do liberals watch? They watch MSNBC, right? What do liberals watch everywhere around the world? They watch the liberal news programming. What do conservatives do? They hate the media. And you're going to hear me talk about this in the populist panel too. But when the media attacks conservatives, that helps us. Newsflash. When the media attacks populist parties, that helps them. Newsflash. And the liberals eat their own stories up, and the conservatives don't believe it anyways, right? That's selective exposure. Selective exposure means that you choose what news that you want, and you create your own echo chamber. There's a lot of debate in academic circles. I'm working on my PhD at the University of Texas, and the big debate, right, is selective exposure versus incidental exposure. And right now, there is not a unanimous decision on what's actually going on online. So we can have Some of my fellow panelists might show you studies from Vox or studies from wherever else. There is not a unanimous decision if selective exposure is more hurtful or incidental exposure is more helpful. Because there's actually studies that show that if we didn't have Facebook, we might just watch Fox News and Drudge Report and never talk to a liberal if I'm a conservative. Or if I'm a liberal, I might watch MSNBC and eat vegan and vegetarian and go to PETA meetings and never talk to somebody who goes to church every Sunday. But Facebook allows me to actually hear the other opinion. That's incidental exposure. Let's also be honest and let's look inward at ourselves in our largely democratic countries. This is a wonderful study. When do states disconnect their digital networks? Guess what? It's not just authoritarian regimes that disconnect digital networks. And we should all be concerned about where this is going. We're seeing it right now. We are sitting in this room, and trust me, there's going to be conversations because I've seen this in the past year. It's scary to me. We are in democracies, and we're talking about limiting free speech. That's what it means when we're talking about fake news and how we need to stop it. That's called limiting free speech. That is authoritarian. This is a really interesting study, and it shows that overall democracies limit the internet speech pretty much almost as much as authoritarian regimes do. Now, the levels are different. It's largely censorship for moral reasons and such on democracies, and authoritarian regimes, it's to protect themselves. So if we get into the mechanisms behind, we might make ourselves feel better. But we should be thinking about this, too. We should be thinking about this. And 3 books that I'd like to leave you with that take various viewpoints of this. One is The Net Delusion. The Net Delusion takes the negative viewpoint. Okay? It talks about China's 50 centers, right, who go around and they get paid by the government to spy on their fellow citizens. Well, that's pretty freaking scary, right? That's something we should all be concerned about. Liberation technology, though, and media power and politics in the digital age talk about in Iran when Neda Sultan was murdered by the Iranian government, how her video on Facebook went viral and people got so upset that they rose up. That's the power of the internet. So I want to leave you with, I think our best days are ahead of us. I think if we band together and remember that some of this is scary and Russian involvement and all these things and whatever is scary, but voters are not fools. And we should not limit ourselves and limit our fellow citizens because we think we know what is best for them. That's authoritarianism. Thank you.
Thanks, Vincent. Plenty to discuss and debate there. I think. Thank you very much for your energetic, bringing your Texas energy to us as well this morning. That's fantastic. Now, I want to move to some of the diplomatic discussion now, and I'm going to call on Matias Lukens first. And this is a social media conference, so of course I've been stalking everyone in our panel online, and I came across a video conference where Matias spoke in 2014, and he predicted that 2015 would be the year of digital warfare, because he was observing a lot of government-to-government personal attacks. And, we heard from Maria Ressa earlier, who 2016 was definitely the year when the internet turned against Rappler. So I just want to know, Matias, tell us more about what you were seeing that led up to that prediction, and what are your reflections on that now?
It's interesting that you bring up that video, because I was talking mainly about the conflict between the West and Russia over Ukraine, eastern Ukraine, which really played out on social media, on Twitter. I don't know if you remember the hashtag United for Ukraine. The State Department came up with that. It was to be launched at a big speech of Barack Obama in Brussels. And of course, if you want to get a hashtag trending, you have to have a powerful hashtag that has never been used before, and you have to have the the accounts tweeting about that, and I told them, well, why didn't you have more of your, the allies to help you? The UK, oh yeah, the UK will tweet about it, but the next day. That's when the hashtag won't trend if, not everyone tweets on the same day. The Finns helped, pitched in, etc. on that hashtag. It was quite interesting to see because it was the first concerted effort by the government to make a hashtag trending, and I told the State Department, listen guys, why don't you just contact Barack Obama? He has, he's the most followed politician in the world. And they said, we can't do that. Because the Barack Obama account is a campaign account, not an official administration account. We're not even allowed to contact the team behind that account to say, hey, would you mind retweeting this or tweeting about this? So this is quite interesting, especially in the context today, where there is confusion between the personal electoral account of President Donald Trump, the @real Donald Trump account, and the administration accounts. That's the POTUS account for the President of the United States. So that was quite interesting. And this is really kind of the warfare I was looking at. I also saw an increase of fake accounts. I myself was followed by 600 fake robot bot accounts in very short successions. What I did, I didn't block them. I actually put them in a list on Twitter, on my Twitter profile. The list is public, and I'm still waiting for Twitter to delete these accounts. But they have been dormant now since 2015. But they can be reactivated anytime. And we've seen that 2 days ago. There's a massive bot attack with fake news, or basically against NATO, and NATO saw that 75% of all the tweets mentioning NATO in the Baltic states were generated by bots, automatic. It's really kind of to spam the discourse about NATO in the Baltic states and Poland. Really interesting study that just came out, and the spokesperson of NATO was followed by 15,000 of these fake accounts. She contacted Twitter government. What happened? They deleted these followers from her account, but they haven't deleted the accounts themselves. So they're still out there accounting to more users of Twitter, which is really, really sad. And I think the platforms, Facebook, Twitter, they really have to crack down on these automated accounts. And this is what we see, kind of the really the spamming, governmental organized spamming on social media, and I think this is really, really sad. And there's also, we've been tracking the evolution of how world leaders, heads of state and government use social media since 2012. I actually wrote in TechCrunch about it back in 2010 when I was still with the World Economic Forum, really looking at, oh look, there is the president of Russia at the time, Dmitry Medvedev, talking directly to Arnold Schwarzenegger or Barack Obama. So it was kind of this new platform, Twitter, this engagement, and the study that we then conducted, Diplomacy, was really looking at not who has the most followers, but who's the best connected, who has the most mutual connection with their peers. And still, it's the European External Action Service, the foreign policy branch of the European Union, which is ahead in terms of digital connections with peers. That gives you a second level, a private level of communication with them. In second position, the Russian Foreign Ministry. So quite really open, wanting to engage with other world leaders, and then the UK, Germany, and France make up the top 5. But then also Iceland and Norway, rather small states, but tweeting, with the big countries. So it's quite interesting, this evolution, and I think there is a period, I would call it, the kind of the Obama digital diplomacy period, where the discourse was respectable and maybe policed, and you would really think about the message before posting it out. And since last year, since November, well, there has been a sea change. We're seeing much more. We're actually seeing what I've always advocated for. I want more Cory Bookers. I want more politicians being personally on Twitter, on social media, on Facebook, doing Facebook Lives, doing Periscope Lives, Q&A sessions, really responding to their constituents, to their voters. Maybe not every day, but let's say every week, every month, do a global town hall. Some have done this, and I want to see more of this, and especially the personal use. And in the beginning, we had the Swedish Foreign Minister Carl Bildt using Twitter personally. And so that was really interesting. He would actually really reply to direct messages, which I found quite interesting. And now we have a US president who is using Twitter personally, exactly what I've always advocated for. It's just the message. Sorry. For me, it's a big shock. You know, yes, it's free speech, but it's not very diplomatic. And this is really what I'm very, very sad about. And I think the fact that Donald Trump is on Twitter is rather off-putting for other world leaders who I would suggest, you know, to start a Twitter account. And this, for example, German Chancellor Angela Merkel is the only G7 leader who doesn't have a personal Twitter account. Yes, she has a Facebook page. Yes, she you know, as a chancellor, she posts on Instagram, but she doesn't have a personal Twitter account. And I'm sure during the current election, it's the example of Donald Trump which might have put her off to open one, finally. So I think that was kind of in a nutshell. We do see more confrontational discourse on social media, also by governments. Governments feel they have been empowered. One last example, the Indian Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj has also used kind of the Trumpian style. I don't know if you remember when she ranted against Amazon. There were 3 tweets she sent out against Amazon a couple of months ago because Amazon Canada was selling doormats with the Indian flag, and somebody had alerted her to that, somebody who had 20 Twitter followers, and she immediately kicked off 3 tweets saying, you know, the High Commission in Ottawa should please take care of this, and until further, you know, she wanted a full apology from Amazon, and until further notice, the Indian Foreign Ministry would not deliver any visas to any Amazon official to come to India. And this coming on Twitter is just a very new discourse, and of course it helps then to have large followings. And she is the most followed female world leader in the top 10 with over 8 million followers on her account.
Thank you very much. Matias? And I think that segues quite nicely into the focus that I want to have on diplomacy and the intersection really that we have now of digital and traditional diplomacy, and where does that leave us now with the much more fast-paced implications on public diplomacy. So I hand over to our expert Jan Millison to speak more about where are we now?
Thank you very much, and it's really wonderful to be here, and thanks very much to the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung for inviting me on this occasion, where I really feel like sort of an outsider on this panel. I'm not excessively worried. I'm not an excessive believer. I'm not handling things myself. Actually, I've been on a Twitter holiday for some part of the summer, and that's the only handle that I handle, my personal Twitter handle. So how to make sense of this introduction? Indeed, what I'm interested in is how the social media and an increasingly digital world is impacting on the way states and other international conduct their international relations. So that's my interest. And it was possible to discuss these things in the past without reference to politics. Diplomacy was something about modes and techniques and far away from politics. And I think the first observation to make would be, hey, it's a good thing that this conference is titled Asian Conference on Political Communication. And I think we all have our associations with this, from depending on where we come from, election politics, worrying about bots or whatever. My take on this would indeed be that when we talk about diplomacy and the way diplomacy is affected by the digital age, it's good to emphasize that diplomats and foreign ministries and governments are more and more conscious in their international relations of the intense political nature of what could be called a VUCA world, a volatile world, an unpredictable world, a complex world, and an ambiguous world. A world where the foundations of what many people believed in have been shaken as foundations of international order. Whether it's either US hegemony, whether China and Russia are non-challengers, have become more of challengers, to what extent is the EU still a model of political integration? So this political context has become much more relevant, and in fact we see that every crisis that we see in international relations, every unpredictable event and you may have your own unpredictable event, as we all have them, whether it's the annexation of Crimea, or the election of Trump, or read the Financial Times, how the Brits are still completely divided about the whole issue of Brexit, that all of these crises have their digital dimension. It's not just about digital change when we talk about diplomacy, but of course this digital dimension is upon all of us. And VUCA, the VUCA world, the volatile, unpredictable, complex world, is meeting, of course, the GAFA world, and which was very clear from these previous presentations, the world of Google, of Apple, of Facebook, and of Amazon. So I'm interested in how does this environment affect diplomacy and diplomats. And I'd like to mention, like Vincent, some positive things, and I think there are things to worry about as well. And movement, the change is so fast that I think when we have to pause now and then to try and learn. Just think back of the Arab Spring, how we thought that the power of the internet was so enormous, but of course it didn't have the power to transform societies in the so-called Arab Spring as some thought it would have. So there is a sense that there are Nescafe schools of interpreters who think that social media change everything and change everything immediately, and who have to adapt the narratives constantly, because indeed we see shifting images from empowerment of those who are more in the margins of society to interpretations of social media actually empowering the already powerful. Probably we can conclude it's empowering everybody. It's empowering everybody in different ways. Now, one open door is, of course, that this is speeding up everything. Social media are speeding up everything, also speeding up diplomacy, as previous technological revolutions have done. The invention of the cable led one British Prime Minister to comment, "This is the end of diplomacy. This is the end of diplomacy." Well, of course, it wasn't the end of diplomacy. But what it did, that it affected the way diplomacy was conducted in terms of relations between headquarters and embassies across the world, with headquarters giving much more power and power of control to headquarters. Now, that I think is changing in diplomacy today, where we see that the rise of social media is also empowering the embassy, is empowering the eyes and ears of embassies in many places that now see diplomacy as a transforming game. It's a transforming game where it's not just those inside government or just orbiting around government, but engaging broader with societies is a condition of successful diplomacy. And that engagement with foreign societies is what we see in Western settings, but also in more closed societies. So the penetration power, that I think is a positive message, Vincent. The penetration power of diplomacy has expanded enormously. It's a different kind of game. It also changes the norms of diplomacy. As we've seen with public diplomacy, engaging with foreign societies actually meant a tendency towards intervention in foreign societies. Now that is upsetting a traditional diplomatic norm. And in the Asian context, I'm so curious about the many inputs from Asia during this conference. We see how there is an inherent tension in a part of the world where the use of social media is more intensive than anywhere else, which sort of collides with a classical image of state-to-state international relations based on old-style Westphalian principles: do not interfere in my domestic affairs. Third, that in this part of the world, in Asia, we see high-tech powers, very highly developed high-tech economies where technology has sort of permeated foreign policy in much more fundamental ways than in the West, in official development aid, in sustainable development policies. So the West is not just a model. We can actually look also for very interesting developments in Asia, like also the fact that some Asian societies are more digitally literate than Western societies, as we can also see in a very sophisticated use of social media. So I think this Asian input in this conference for me at least, is wildly fascinating of what we are discussing here. Now, on the upbeat side, I think it is indeed good to see how social media can help change things for the better. And that's where people have already said things. We can recognize political leaders. We can also recognize individual diplomats. They're no longer just faceless people. We can see, as we saw with WikiLeaks, what's the whole machinery that is grinding constantly and doing stuff, working in the national interest, but also working for the global good. So governments, foreign ministries, I think it would be fair to say they are digital infants. They are laggards. They're resistant to change. Many people of my generation, older and younger, some people say, don't really realize what this is all about because they're too old in the first place. Now, I think that could be challenged because I've met very young diplomats who don't know anything about this either. So it's not necessarily a generational thing. But what is interesting is, of course, to think about how foreign ministries and governments can take advantage of these media in a positive sense. And I'd like to single out just a couple of things. One would be that we have seen in a series of international crises how digital media have become a very important resource of information and a communication channel for governments. Now here we have to pinch ourselves because governments are control freaks. They like to control everything. They like to control information. They like to use their own information channels. And here we see that Western governments and others have come to the point where they accept that the information they need is often open source and can be found in social media. And the way to find your citizens, like after the Nepal earthquake, is through social media. It's in fact after the Arab Spring that many governments found out that their citizens were where they were not themselves. So governments really had to catch up in the years after the Arab Spring to be in those social media, also to help their citizens, to get information from their citizens. And I think the digital humanitarians here are also non-gov, of course, of them a lot, can teach many lessons in that respect. Public diplomacy, I've already mentioned, public diplomacy, the message, the capacity really to engage with populations in ways that we could not anticipate only 20 years ago. Generations have shrunk. I personally think a generation is only 20 years, not 30 years now. This is going very fast. But there are also some developments that put me on the side of the worriers. Don't just think this is a force for good. And I think that what has also happened, that those people who vote have sometimes voted on the basis of being badly informed or being informed by the wrong people or were the wrong machines. So it's not just a force for good. And I think in public diplomacy we see an interesting, I'm only beginning to understand this, an interesting trend towards public diplomacy as being associated with future potentials, high potentials, influentials, people in foreign societies to make a difference, to a sort of twisted kind of public diplomacy, which is more technological, where actually you use machines and you use algorithms not to boost your friends and find your friends, but to influence the friends of your enemies and to penetrate foreign societies, not to penetrate your own networks, but the networks of others. And that's where I can learn a great deal at this conference, but I think that's an important trend. If I may close on a final point, I think we should not forget that what's happening online is, of course, building on what already happened offline. This is not just change in the digital realm, it's also change about how international relations are conducted with a great variety of actors and also in a different style. Previous speakers talked about campaigns. Indeed, the campaign style of diplomacy shows the power of social media, whether it's in the field of sustainable development, in the field of LGBT rights and others, in campaigns like She Decides by the Dutch Foreign and Trade Minister. We see that these digital media, they accelerate processes which is of course at the same time daunting. It was in the media that the Korean Foreign Ministry appointed a diplomat to follow President Trump's Twitter account. Right or wrong, it's not the only government that is deeply worried about messages coming right from the top in the United States. Below that top, diplomacy has become a networked activity, which I think confronts diplomats more and more with the fact that, as one German report by the Mercator Stiftung put it, they feel less distinctive. They feel less distinctive in a network environment where what really gives them added value is to be as up to speed with all these modern media and to deliver added value to the networks in which they participate. So a much more varied diplomatic environment, a much more democratized diplomatic environment, and a diplomatic environment where other rules apply, I think is where we have to try and understand what's the difference of digital media. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question for the whole panel, actually, to discuss and debate, if you like. Just having heard, your own takes and your own insights, I want to know, are governments now, through social media, are they more accountable to the public? Or is this all just a front so they can keep up appearances? Who wants to go first?
Happy to take this. We do see that governments, well, they open up on social media in terms they have Facebook page or Twitter accounts, but once you have over 50,000 followers, you're becoming a broadcaster, and it's really difficult to engage one-to-one and kind of reply and be accountable. I think most governments use social media as another broadcasting tool, a one-way broadcasting tool, and very few are actually interacting. Maybe one exception that confirms the rule is the German government. On their Facebook page, when they started it, they say, we'll try to answer every single question. At the time they had, 15,000 fans? This page has grown exponentially, but still, they basically have a whole team and will reply to comments, constructive comments. So there's a really interesting dialogue going on there. But it's not, social media channels might be free. It's an investment to have somebody to follow Donald Trump's Twitter account or to have this interaction. So I really would encourage, governments to rethink the structure of their communications team and to have people replying directly, but it's very time intensive.
So what is accountability? To me, accountability isn't a comment. To me, accountability in a democratic society is holding feet to the fire come election time. That's accountability. And accountability allows for us to check our governments. And I think that the internet does allow more accountability when it comes to if one, seeing the warts more on our elected officials, actually hearing more information about them, actually digging more into who they really are, and when they make a mistake, we're reminded of that mistake, whereas, take the United States, some of our all of our U.S. senators are up for election every 6 years. 6 years is a long time. And elected officials know back in the old days they could make a bad vote, and 6 years later, voters would forget, but not online. Online through SEO, it lives forever. Online through the internet, you're reminded of it forever. So as a citizen, I'm very happy that we can hold our governments accountable, that I can coalesce with people to kick somebody out of office or to build something. Like, think about what Barack Obama did with the healthcare vote. I think that was the best case of a government using the internet to push its own agenda. So kind of your question, but flipped on its side. He used the internet to encourage his supporters through Organizing for America to tweet at their representatives, to call the representatives. Because let's be honest, it's easier to avoid a tweet. It's harder to avoid people calling or showing up at your doorstep, right? He was organizing all of that to get his health care bill passed. So that's a great use, too, of winning an election and then actually using the internet to help fulfill what your promises are. And I think if President Trump was going to do this right, he would take something like his border wall and use the internet in the same way that Barack Obama used it for healthcare, because there's a lot of people that support, those are both very, very popular issues. The border wall is 65, 70% approval in the United States. So it's a very popular issue that he could actually use the internet to push forward.
I think that that question was better answered 4 or 5 years ago. I think that the two things that are in play now that weren't as strong back then was our own cognitive biases and the way that aligns with the algorithms on the intermediaries we use. So what we're seeing happening is that the physical world actually doesn't translate to the virtual world, because the algorithms are the ones in between, and the algorithms are a black box. And so what we've seen happening everywhere around the world is, instead of creating a central space and strengthening a central space for discussion and debate, where all sides can come and actually debate, we're seeing algorithms splintering them off. If you're on the right, you go to the right only with the people on the right. You're on the left, you're only with the people on the left, and you wind up pushing each other even further apart from each other, draining the central space, draining that space democracy needs.
Sorry, but when did it ever happen that people were actually meeting together and having debate, except for on the Senate floor? I mean, when were average people actually having debate with one another before the internet?
I would
we were
say
letting
on the
bureaucrats.
on the internet now, I would say from 2007 all the way up until 2015, and that's when the algorithms changes really shifted.
Okay, that's fair.
Right. Yes, I'm sure we're going to learn a lot about in the discussions about algorithms, and I believe I agree with Maria. That's a really important development, which is sort of is a very significant game changer, including that it leads to more authoritarian governments, to give them tools to refine control over their own societies, as it gives in international relations governments tools to penetrate networks outside of their own. But on the question of accountability, I'd like to make just a couple of points. And one of them, that we see indeed how politicians feel much more directly accountable and constantly accountable through their exposure in social media. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, it's probably a bit of both. What we also see, and that where diplomacy is very much about language, is that, and we see, of course, we see it to the extreme with President Trump on Twitter, the use of language becomes more undiplomatic, more macho, I would almost say, which has an impact on politicians' own system, those who advise the person in high office, but it also has an impact on allies. And in the Asian context, I've met quite a few East Asian diplomats outside of East Asia who were extremely unsettled by the effects of a president communicating so directly. What we also see, it is sort of, it's permanent symmetry. We've become used to heads of government and heads of state being active in politics. We've been used to personal diplomacy, presidents and prime ministers calling one another to forge coalitions. But this is a kind of being permanent online at the highest level, which creates a new dynamic between government and society. And in various respects, I think these days one of the very fundamental questions is how social media change the relationship and the dynamics between government and society. Where does the diplomat come in there? The diplomat comes in the sense that she or he is faced with demands to be much more dialogical with society through social media, which is actually pretty hard, because diplomats have, in their relationship with society, been better at broadcasting than being with dialoguing. And ultimately, they are not accountable.
I have to open it up to the floor now because I think we can discuss and debate among us, but I need to be fair and I need to share with you, the audience. I'm sure you've got a lot of things that are on your mind that these discussions have tweaked. We have a gentleman there. His hand was up first. If you could just let us know who you are.
I'm Dmytro Senik, ambassador of Ukraine, both on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, distinguished panelists, for sharing your ideas. I just wanted also to support the idea that diplomacy and diplomacy becoming very natural partners. For Ukraine, when the hybrid war waged by Russia started, we did use Twitter, Facebook, other social networks to help defend our case, which is very difficult because, as you may understand, Russian government pours zillions of money for propaganda and fake news. It's difficult to fight fake news, and I wanted to ask a distinguished panelist who was speaking about fake news. Imagine that tomorrow Russia Today, Sputnik, and other Russian news would come up with the news and narrative that North Korea government pays to you, salary, whatever. How to fight it? So I think fake news and defamation are very important things to deal with, and not easy though. Again, many thanks.
And it's an interesting point because, I know you didn't want to discuss fake news and we're talking about, and people do have the right to all of the information that's on the internet, but do they know what that information is? Can the audience discern when there's a kernel of truth that's been manipulated?
So, sir, was your question to me? Okay. Okay, so my answer back, I think, would be a lot of the information that I've seen, either in America or in France or other countries that I've worked in, that the Russian government or bots or proxies of the Russian government were pushing out information was similar to what Maria was talking about and showing. I thought was a great example of that one tweet retweeted 50,000 frickin' times, right? I mean, that's a very clear example of a propaganda campaign. My advice to all of my clients is the first thing that's actually most important when it comes to truth online is SEO. Did you all know that people trust Wikipedia? This is a true study. They trust Wikipedia more than Encyclopedia Britannica. Did you know that in the 2016 race that the internet was the #1 source of information and that people trust news they search themselves on the internet better than they trust news from the New York Times? Those are facts. So what does that mean when I think of those things and I look at my clients is I want to be sure that when people are searching online, because when else in politics, when else ever do we get to actually proactively pull the information down? It's only through the internet. Only through the internet can I go and search questions like Marco Rubio's search history, or where was Angela Merkel born, or whatever that it is, right? So what I'd recommend back is whatever issues that they are, if it's about Crimea, if it's about some other piece of information, I would launch my own truth campaign. I would launch search ads back when people are searching on that issue to say, maybe Ukraine government official response, and actually have some search ads up when voters are proactively seeking that information. I would also have a truth page, and because this is where you get to play at who you are better than others, you have the name of the embassy of Ukraine. People are going to trust that more than random on Twitter, absolutely. You have that name. So use that. I would use that name if I was an agency like that and actually say this is the official response from the Ukrainian government. I'd have search ads. I would have a truth versus facts page where I would even take screenshots, just like Maria did, of some of these lies online, and I'd have those under myth or fake news or whatever you want to say, and then I'd have my truth right there next to it. And I'd have different pages, each page being its own issue that is being propagandized online. So remember SEO, think about what people are searching. If you have money, spend money on search ads. But I would do what the Russian government's, I mean, we talked a lot about Twitter up here. Twitter ain't everything. Twitter's barely anything, to be honest. In most countries, it's nothing. I think Venezuela is the only country where Twitter's the #1 search, the #1 social network.
Indonesia.
Where? Sorry?
Indonesia has
Indonesia
two
too. Yeah. So it's actually falling in Western countries in importance. So think about SEO. Think about putting up your own truth versus fact page. And then if I was you, by the way, if I was a media outlet, if I was a campaign, if I was an embassy, use the credibility that your name brings in your pushing back, because all these bots, all of these Russian propaganda machines, all this stuff, they have no credibility versus your name of the embassy.
Two quick points. I think Ukraine is at ground zero of much of the fight. There's a great group there called Stop Fakery that's looking at fake news, and they're trying to gain. I think the problem is that we're at the trough. I think this is where we've seen that you can do this. So if in the old days controlling information was about censorship or controlling what gets out, in these new days it's about spewing out so much stuff that you distrust, that you don't know whom to trust. And I think impunity right now makes it very difficult. The medium-term solution is media literacy. And I, like everyone here, I am optimistic. We will get through this and we will create a better generation. But that's medium-term media literacy. The short term, you mentioned SEO, I've mentioned Facebook, we've mentioned algorithms for Facebook and Twitter. The short term, the only ones who have absolute power right now to change it are the intermediaries. These are the social media platforms that are extremely empowering and right now really full of trash and hate speech, and they need to step up and take over what the old journalist role of gatekeepers, that's theirs now. They decide how the SEO works.
So just one more very quick thing. I was just thinking in my head that I think a way to combat this too, and we've seen Trump do this back, and even though you could argue that some of the fake news is coming from his supporters, right, is Netanyahu in Israel a few months ago, he released some videos where he was specifically calling out this as untruths. And I think video is also a very powerful component in this. If there's a specific lie that somebody's telling about you, address it in video. So to actually have the ambassador or to have some spokesman or to have some grassroots leader actually address that back and titling that video correctly. Because remember, SEO is based on the words. So if the lie is about Crimea, actually say the truth about Crimea from Ambassador whoever. So specifically titling that and then addressing that with a video back.
Yeah.
One could perhaps, it is going to be very time consuming, of course, with all these competing truths that are going to be thrown at one another, which seems to like to almost dominate a lot of political discourse. I just wanted to leave one short comment in 2 sentences really for this conference, because I think what a lot of this is all about is building resilient societies. So education, building digital literacy is really is very much the essence of what this conference should also be about. Thanks.
Thank you. I definitely agree. Yes, Matias.
Maybe one thing to fight, fake news or these bots is basically to be out there, not to be out there, but basically create your Facebook page, be on Twitter, be on Instagram, go into Snapchat if you want to reach the younger crowd. I think it's absolutely key that governments, organizations go out there, be present, be in those social networks, because it's the only way to have better SEO first of all, and to counter that fake news. And one thing about Maria's case that opened the session, I found it very, very powerful. And I really think the platforms have to step up. And like Twitter, it takes if you get a direct message, it takes you 5 clicks to put that direct message as spam. 5 clicks. No, there should be just one spam button. There's a like button. Can we please have a dislike button, like on YouTube, or a spam button? And then basically the networks will realize, oh yeah, this content doesn't play very well, and maybe this is actually, fake news or, inciting hatred that we have to take down.
I just want to say I don't like the dislike button, because on YouTube, Justin Bieber's videos get disliked, and I'm a big believer up here.
Okay. I just want one quick comment from the front before I wrap up.
Yes, hello, my name is Astrid Langer. I'm a journalist, I'm a political journalist, and I would like to annotate that there was a Harvard-Harris study last week that only 3% of Americans actually support the border wall. Having said that, I was wondering, because you, Vincent, were making a very strong statement in the beginning against fake news, and I was wondering what your opinion is on news like the fact that Donald Trump claims, or his supporters claim, that he won the popular vote. How you feel about that spreading on the internet? Because I mean that's a proven fact. And how do you feel about statements like that spreading? Isn't that fake news? Thank you.
So to your first point, I'm going to have to look at that, because there's more than 3% of people support every single issue. So I would, okay. Yeah, more than 3% of people support really weird issues. So I am sure that it has more than 3% support. Second, issues and comments from the president about him winning the popular vote or whatever that he's saying are very easily disproven. So, I don't know what to say back except for that people can say whatever that they want, but you can go and just Google that answer, and that's the great thing about the internet is you Google popular vote, the first thing that's going to show up is a million sources, because there's no source that shows that he won the popular vote. So, I don't know what to say back. That's just a falsity. So
yeah,
some things are just false.
But he's repeating that lie, that falsity.
Yes, but nobody, guys, nobody, even people that support him, believe that. Just because someone repeats it again and again, they don't believe it. I voted for Donald Trump. I worked against him for 2 years. I worked for Rand Paul. So I tried to beat Donald Trump, okay? Can we give me credit for that, okay? I tried to beat Donald Trump. We lost, okay? So at the end, I voted for him. But just because he says things doesn't mean people believe them. We're not stupid just because we voted for Donald Trump. I know he didn't win the popular vote. So most people know that. I think America's a pretty smart country. So, he can say whatever he wants, and just because someone says it doesn't mean we all need to freak out and be like, people are going to believe him. I don't think people believe that. You can go a million places in every textbook that every student reads. It's going to say Donald Trump loses popular vote.
But Vincent, if we just, I want to finish on a note in Asia. People, Maria, is it correct if I say people actually don't know what they're getting?
Absolutely. I think that's the difference in this day and age, right? And that platform that is so extremely empowering also allows you to say a lie 1,000,000 times in a second. And, it used to be in the old days, you say a lie 10 times, truth has a chance to catch up. You say a lie 1,000,000 times, it's truth, especially if you can't get to the populations that it gets to. So that's our challenge. I think it's tough to be a politician. It's tough to be in government now. It's tough to be a journalist. It's tough to be in a public space. Empowering at the same time. How do we get people's trust back? That's a challenge for politicians. It's a challenge for journalists.
I literally have 2 minutes left on my counter. Does anyone else have a quick comment? Oh, sorry. The question right in the back. Sorry, he just had his hand up slightly faster.
Thank you for an excellent and very rich panel. My name is Ravi Agarwal. I'm a speaker in one of the panels next tomorrow. My question is that by emphasizing the personal communication of leaders, I think, of democracies, and they work very differently in different parts of the world, because democracies to me are highly institutionalized. They're through institutional structures that they operate. By making it very personal, the whole conversation about and how leaders are operating on social media, are we not changing the fine balance between leadership and institutions, which are the underpinnings of democracy? And are the institutions really changing because of what leaders are saying? And are leaders less responsible to their institutions through which elect them, because people don't elect only people. Maybe unlike in America, people elect whole systems into place and whole ideologies into place. That fine balance between how democracies work institutionally. We don't see Supreme Court judges tweeting, what the next judgment is going to be. And there are core institutions which run democracies.
We don't see Supreme Court judges tweeting yet, but I'm sure the next ones, as the younger generation comes to power, they will, and we'll have to deal with that. I don't see the question between the personal or the institutional. Look at Indian Prime Minister Modi. He has the personal account, Narendra Modi, and the PMO India account, which he inherited from Manmohan Singh, who set that one up. And having somebody personal, a great example, of course, in this country is Prime Minister Lee. I love to, follow his Facebook feeds, his Twitter feeds, because he's showing a very personal side of his, duties when he does, the pictures he does when, the hashtag guess where, letting his Facebook fans guessing where is he now, kind of, and that is kind of amazing. He doesn't do that every day or every week, but, every now and then, and that's a personal touch which I really, really enjoy, because, we do have the impression we can connect with people. He's just one of us. But then somebody said yesterday, yeah, but you want a prime minister to be, much more institutional, more prime ministerial. So I do like the personal engagement.
A final word, Jan.
Yes, that's really a wonderful comment. Thanks very much for that. I certainly think there is a tension. I agree there is a tension between the quick reaction time that is needed by leaders and the way that, if that's what you implied, they can rely on the institutional advice. A wonderful example, I think, is how President Trump congratulated his counterpart Putin on sending away so many people from the US embassy in Moscow so that he didn't have to do the job for him. It's sort of a political perversion of diplomacy, and we've seen a subsequent thinning of diplomatic relations that I think history has shown doesn't resolve much. What does history do show? It shows that when you cut out those layers of advice, there may be disaster in the offing. What goes back to the history of the US involvement in the Vietnam War is that under McCarthyism, all Southeast Asia and East Asia experts were squeezed out of the State Department. So really a fine balance between having proper leadership, personal engagement by the leader, but relying on that system of experts is quite important. I realize I speak here also as an expert, and I can assure you I've been on a panel where I was disparaged precisely because I was an expert. We don't just live in a post-fake society, we also live in a post-expert society and a post-knowledge society, and that is a bit scary.
On that note, I would actually like to, I have to draw a close, but we promised that we had a panel with rich insights, and I think they've definitely delivered. So thank you. Please join me in thanking our panel.